Look, I think if he believes that he could announce a deal that would be victory in the negotiation, he doesn't care what the terms are. To him, it's a matter of indifference. 20% of Ukraine, 25%, 15%, really, whatever. And I think that's what's motivating him. And that's why it's so dangerous for Ukraine and the Europeans, because once that deal's in place, that's the last time Trump's going to pay attention to Ukraine.
Hi, I'm Maddie, Hale, and welcome to the Trump Report. Today I've got former National Security Advisor John Bolton on the show, and just a reminder that you can watch us every day, Monday through Friday on Times Radio's YouTube, or you can stream us as a podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Ambassador Bolton, thank you for joining the Trump Report again today.
Glad to be with you.
We have to start off, of course, with this report from Axios. They leaked this 28-point plan for ending the Ukraine-Russia war last week. It was drafted with the US and Russia kind of leaving Ukraine out of the equation. It was criticised extensively, but then it resulted in Germany, the UK and France making a counter-proposal that they submitted as well. And then, of course, on Sunday, we saw the US and Ukrainian delegates meeting in Geneva to discuss more negotiations on this. And the US side said it was tremendous in terms of progress. So, Ambassador, it has been a whirlwind back and forth over these proposals, but what has your response to this been?
Well, I think the situation is completely confused, and that's probably the best you can say about it. There are so many conflicting accounts, including Marco Rubio, Secretary of State, in speaking with a bunch of U.S. senators at a conference in Halifax, Nova Scotia, in Canada, and a few hours later, Marco Rubio B saying, I didn't say what they say I said to them about this being a Russian proposal. Actually, it's a U.S. proposal. So I'm sure we'll get Marco Rubio to straighten that out at some point, but in the meantime, it does appear that there have been some kinds of negotiations between the U.S. and Russia. On the U.S. side, through Steve Witkoff, the ever-present personal envoy of Donald Trump, that produced something that looked very pro-Russian. And everything else since that news broke has been efforts by Ukraine, the UK, other European NATO members to roll that back. And I think where we stand now, maybe not for long, but at least for now, is that the whole issue is under discussion by a broader group of countries, obviously most critically including Ukraine. What it says to me is that Donald Trump is still intensely motivated to find a deal regarding Ukraine to bolster his Nobel Peace Prize candidacy. I had thought, and I think I'm not alone in making this mistake, that Trump had backed away from the Ukraine-Russia war, that he didn't see a solution possible, and so he was turning his attention to something else, maybe Venezuela. But obviously, Witkoff or somebody has been working away, and that's why we are today. I think it's very hard to predict the outcome at this point. I think just to focus on Ukraine, the terms as revealed in the press at different points over the past several days have been uniformly unfavorable, not just to Ukraine, but to NATO. In many respects, that is the Kremlin's ultimate goal, not simply to neutralize Ukraine's capacity for self-defense, but to push NATO back as well. And I think that is something that is totally unacceptable, whatever you think of the Ukraine situation. That for the U.S. even to have contemplated some of these ideas is very, very disturbing. But I'm sure in the next days we'll have even more confusion as the negotiations continue.
I can imagine. And Ambassador, we'll get into the logistics of this proposal and kind of what's gone on since. But you mentioned that you felt as if, they weren't really getting any headway with the Russia-Ukraine conflict, that Donald Trump had almost bowed out of this, that he wasn't really reaching any milestones on it. Late last week when all of the headlines were surrounding Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein, headlines of which Donald Trump definitely doesn't want, there was conversations about what headlines he would throw out to the media to orchestrate, distractions. So do you think that there's reason to believe that perhaps the Trump administration threw this out as a way to distract everyone from this Epstein drama going on?
Well, I think that's a possibility. Every one of the negotiations that Witkoff has conducted with the Russians, and specifically personally with Vladimir Putin, I believe have been done by himself alone. That is to say, unaccompanied by diplomats from the State Department, from the U.S. Embassy in Moscow, in many cases, not even accompanied by a U.S. interpreter. So that the version that Trump gets back and that the rest of the government gets back, if anybody else does get a read back, comes only from Witkoff and the notes or recollections that he has. And I think this has been part of the problem, both in Ukraine and in the context of the war in Gaza and the wider war between Israel and Iran, is that Witkoff doesn't really understand a lot of what's going on here, and his memory is selective. And so that's one reason I think why there's so many versions from the U.S. side alone of what's going on. And that may now have changed. Maybe Rubio's back in charge. We'll have to see.
Ambassador Marco Rubio, I mean, he's still doing this dual job as a, stand-in national security advisor and, of course, Secretary of State. You've done the job. You know how much work it is, so let alone doing two jobs at the same time. You and I spoke months ago about how this could be a reason as to why there are things falling through the cracks. Do you still believe that?
Yes, I think when you have a lone negotiator without coordination with other departments, without coordinating with other things that are going on, like the situation in Venezuela. Rubio's back in the United States and now has to turn his attention to that. You just have a breakdown and loss of perspective on what's going on. And I think that leaves you always trying to catch up, coming from behind, prisoner of what others are trying to do, and forcing you to follow their timetable instead of the other way around. So I think it could be a very hectic period here looking forward, both with respect to Ukraine and Venezuela. And while we're at it, let's throw in the Middle East too. Who knows what Hamas may try or Iran may try, while U.S. decision makers are so obviously preoccupied elsewhere.
A few months ago, Donald Trump, he spoke at the UN General Assembly. He said that Ukraine could win the war. He said Ukraine could win back all of the land that Russia had taken over, which is currently around 19-20%. So now, just a few months later, this proposal is leaked, and it shows that Ukraine would have to concede territory in the east, including all of Donbass, not just the 88% that Russia currently controls, but the entire region. So including that, extra 12 to 14% that Ukraine still occupies. So we would also see Donbass and Crimea recognized as Russian territory. So, Ambassador, why do you think Donald Trump and his administration are flip-flopping so heavily on one of the most important concessions when it comes to this war, which is, of course, territory?
Because it suits him. It's what looks appealing to him today. I mean, in one of these hectic days over the past several, he was quoted in the media saying, look, either the Ukrainians can take this proposal, which he was at that point claiming as his own. He said they can either take this proposal or they can fight their little hearts out. It goes back to the February meeting with Zelensky and Trump in the Oval Office, where Trump said to Zelensky, "You don't have the cards." And I hope if people in Britain and more widely in Europe carry one conclusion away from this weekend, is that Donald Trump couldn't care less about Ukraine. He couldn't care less about its sovereignty, its territorial integrity, the freedom of its people. They're just blocks of land to him on a checkerboard that right now are in the way of his getting a Nobel Peace Prize. That's what he wants. He doesn't want a peaceful, long-term solution to the conflict. He wants to be able to declare victory due to his diplomatic effort, get the Nobel Peace Prize, put it on the shelf, and move on to his next challenge.
Well, on that note, Ambassador Trump wrote on True Social, he said, Ukraine leadership has expressed zero gratitude towards our efforts. This, of course, prompted President Zelensky to then thank him publicly online. He then told reporters he's always looking to buy missiles, referring to Zelensky. He said, look, when you start a war, you should know that you are capable of winning. Don't start a war against someone 20 times bigger than you and then hope that people will give you some missiles. I mean, Ambassador, these kind of words really do mirror that Oval Office showdown that you mentioned in February. He was condemned so heavily at the time for blaming Ukraine for the war, for saying that they had started the war when it was a sovereign country that was invaded. It's as simple as that. So, I mean, what is your response to these comments from him?
Well, it just shows that when he gets an idea in his head, it never leaves. He may modify it, as you say. He was heavily criticized after the February Zelensky-Trump meeting. He seemed to tack with the wind to try and avoid confrontations. Zelensky obviously made, over a long period of time, a huge effort to mollify Trump, to placate him, to get him to see Ukraine's side of the picture. And we can see now, basically 10 months after Trump assumes the presidency, he's still right where he was at the beginning. And you know, this cycle can repeat itself many, many times. But as I say, the fundamental point is that Donald Trump couldn't care less about Ukraine. He still thinks he's friends with Vladimir Putin. I'll guarantee it. I bet Witkoff is reporting back to him that he and Putin are, and this Kirill Dmitriev, who's the head of the Russian Sovereign Wealth Fund, basically have been having very positive conversations. Trump thinks things are going great. Rubio doesn't want to disabuse him of that. That's why he's saying the discussions are going great. And yet we have the president of Finland saying just within the past day or so that he sees many, many large issues still out there. Chancellor Merz of Germany is saying, well, we might have some kind of interim agreement by Thanksgiving, but certainly no final resolution.
And it's not really confirmed the details of the proposal or the amendments made between the United States and Ukraine when they met yesterday in Geneva. We know some of the amendments made in the European counter proposal, but when you look at the situation, Ambassador, what do you think the priority for all parties involved should be when it comes to Ukraine's interests?
Well, speaking of the European counterproposal, Rubio was asked about it and said he didn't know what it was, had never heard of it. So, look, the key point here is to understand why twice since 2014 Russia has invaded Ukraine. Russia under Vladimir Putin is trying to recreate the Russian Empire, not the Soviet Union. Looks a lot like it in geographic terms, but the Russian Empire. And you cannot have a Russian Empire without Belarus and Ukraine. Belarus, they've just about got their hands on. Ukraine obviously remains a problem. So whatever Putin is doing, he's doing it from the perspective not of what the division of territory of Ukraine might be today, but well into the future when he believes Russia should have it all. That means that any kind of interim agreement or any kind of ceasefire with Russia that Ukraine might enter into has to keep that in mind. And therefore, many of the items in the purported U.S.-Russian peace plan completely contrary to that objective. No foreign troops on Ukrainian soil, giving up territory that Russia has not yet even militarily been victorious on, a wide buffer zone of more Ukrainian territory between the front lines of the Russians and the Ukrainians, no NATO membership, no long-range weapons that can hit targets deep inside Russia. And yes, Ukraine can have an amorphous security guarantee that may or may not ever come into effect. All that's doing is setting Ukraine up for the third Russian invasion. And I don't think there's any Ukrainian leader that can accept that. Many media figures are speculating that Trump saw Zelensky as being in a very weak position because of scandals, corruption scandals inside Ukraine. I tell you, the weakest position he's in is I don't think the Ukrainian people would ever accept a leader who came anywhere close to accepting the terms we're talking about. So my guess is this is still a long way from any kind of resolution.
Ambassador, say that Ukraine took this proposal from the US and they signed it. How likely do you think that would be setting them up for a third invasion?
Well, I think almost certainly. I mean, I've been of the view, incorrectly, I think, for about a year and a half, that it would be to Russia's advantage to have a ceasefire. Their troops have been mauled in this almost 4 year long campaign now. A third of the Black Sea fleet is on the floor of the Black Sea. Their economy has become hopelessly entangled in the war. They've suffered a lot of lost income because of the sanctions. Russia could use a couple years to recover and get ready for a third invasion. But Putin has kept the war going. Many people think because it helps keep him in power. So I could see advantages for Russia either way. They certainly don't seem to be in any rush to come to a ceasefire or an agreement that requires them to withdraw from any territory they've conquered. Indeed, their maximalist approach of saying they want land they don't have yet appears to be paying off. So, from Russia's assessment of America's position, I think they still hold the whip hand with respect to Trump.
Well, on that note of kind of how Ukraine would be able to live if this happened and land was conceded to Russia, there's always been this conversation with Zelensky over whether he's willing to give up some land, but it would be in exchange for guaranteed US security protection. So this draft, the original US proposal that was leaked late last week, it said Ukraine will receive robust, reliable security guarantees from the US if Russia invades again, and that all global sanctions will be restored and recognition for the new territory will be withdrawn. So, Ambassador, is that enough protection for Ukraine?
Well, having watched the past year of the Trump administration, and what he said during the 2024 campaign, anybody who thinks that a Trump security guarantee for Ukraine is worth the paper it's printed on is living in a dream world. And I don't think Zelensky and his colleagues live there. Who believes that a Trump security guarantee means anything if Russia invades again? So I think European leaders may be reluctant to say that out loud, but I think that's the reality that Zelensky and the Ukrainians face. 3 more years of the Trump administration. Are they really going to roll the dice that Russia won't attack again within that 3-year period? Hard to believe.
How do you think Ukraine can ever believe the word of the United States or the signature of the United States in these guaranteed security protections if they didn't help Ukraine after signing off and giving away all their nuclear weapons?
Right. Well, that is a historical antecedent to all of this, and it's why what Ukraine really wants is NATO membership. Like Finland, like Sweden, they understand the only true protection is behind a NATO border. And that's why the Russians are so determined not to let that happen. It would be a fundamental deviation from NATO's policy, probably from the day it was founded, that nobody else tells NATO who they will accept into membership, and they do not exclude any country making a free, open decision to ask to join NATO. So we would be making an exception for a country that's been invaded without any provocation whatever, basically acceding to the aggressor's demands. If that's not a bad precedent for NATO and Europe, which it is, it's a bad precedent for the United States and its friends around the world, particularly looking at Chinese aspirations along their Indo-Pacific periphery, thinking of Taiwan and the South China Sea in particular.
Trump said that, there are still changes happening to the proposal, that it's not finished, but he does want a resolution by Thursday, Thanksgiving weekend. Ambassador, is he happy to surrender Ukraine to Russia to get this done?
Look, I think if he believes that he could announce a deal that would be victory in the negotiation, he doesn't care what the terms are. To him, it's a matter of indifference. 20% of Ukraine, 25%, 15%, really, whatever. And I think that's what's motivating him. And that's why it's so dangerous for Ukraine and the Europeans, because once that deal's in place, that's the last time Trump's going to pay attention to Ukraine.
Ambassador, you've obviously worked within the Trump administration, and there's always conversations surrounding how easy or how hard Republicans find it when coming out and publicly disagreeing with their president, and kind of what condemnation they'll get from him. But Republicans do seem to be a little bit, confused or disagreeing publicly with Donald Trump on this. So I want to read out a few quotes to you on this. So Mitch McConnell, he said that POTUS is right that Biden's weakness emboldened enemies like Putin, but those who think pressuring the victim and appeasing the aggressor will bring peace are kidding themselves. Which difficult concessions are pressing are we pressing Russia to make? Roger Wicker said this so-called peace plan has real problems, and I'm highly skeptical it will achieve peace. Lindsey Graham said that while there are good ideas in the proposed Russia-Ukraine peace plan, there are several areas that are very problematic and can be made better. And then Don Bacon said the European counter plan is 10 times better than the Witkoff Ukrainian surrender plan. The European plan should be the plan, not go backwards. Ukraine is a sovereign state and should not be forced to live on its knees to dictator Putin. So, I mean, it's clearly causing friction within the Republican Party, Ambassador, to propose that Ukraine can make such concessions.
Right. Well, in Washington today, there's a lot of opinion swirling around that Trump's base is cracking. The Epstein scandal has produced its fissures. There are disputes about the handling of the elections earlier this month, the off-year elections, as we call them, so there weren't a lot, but Republicans did very poorly across the board, and many attribute that to Trump, to the economy. So I think it's safer for Republicans now to speak out against Trump. More of them are inclined to do it. And I think really among senators, this conversation with Rubio, himself obviously a former senator, where he tells them one thing, that is to say, this original plan was a Russian plan, only to disavow it later in the same day, is going to cause a lot of heartburn. Now, we're in the Thanksgiving recess, so a lot of people are not in Washington. But I think a lot of senators on the Republican side are speaking to themselves saying, well, what happened to Marco? And that could tell us a lot, too. I think probably most Republicans, most supporters of Ukraine, of whatever party, are just hoping to push all this past Thanksgiving. I mean, it is a big holiday in the United States. A lot of people take half the week off. As I say, many people are not in Washington. If you can kick it into December, then it becomes an issue that you can probably stretch out a little bit more.
Speaking of Lindsey Graham, now he's of course one of Donald Trump's staunchest supporters, but he's also one of the staunchest supporters for Ukraine. Now he announced last week that Donald Trump had agreed to sign this sanctions package that would effectively slap up to 500% tariffs on any country, even some individuals that are importing Russian energy, as a penalty for funding Putin's war. So this bill was introduced in April and there had been so much stalling. It seemed as if Donald Trump wasn't greenlighting it. So Lindsey Graham was really walking on eggshells. He has 85 Senate co-sponsors on this bill, but now Congressman Brian Fitzpatrick has submitted a discharge petition to force a vote on this bill. So he'll, of course, need those 218 signatures. After so many months of back and forth, Ambassador, and Donald Trump stalling on this, do you see this going ahead?
Well, I don't think it will go ahead as long as Trump is in the process or thinks he's in the process of trying to make the deal. He won't want to take steps against Russia that may prevent the deal from happening, because his objective is not to help Ukraine. His objective is to make a deal so that, like Theodore Roosevelt, who got the Nobel Peace Prize for bringing the end of the Russo-Japanese War back in 1905, although Trump probably doesn't know about that, that's what he wants. He wants a deal, and he doesn't want to impose sanctions on Russia that might prevent that from happening. So I think that's in limbo as of the Lindsey Graham sanctions package is in limbo as of now.
And many analysts look at this very package from across the world and think that this would be the bill, this would be the sanctions package that could effectively bankrupt Putin within 6 months and stop the war from this economic point of view. So, Ambassador, is the White House not really ready to go down that heavy route of economic condemnation on Russia? Because there's obviously so many threats when it comes to sanctions. They've got some tariffs and sanctions in place, but there was always room to really punish Russia, and they've really held back on it.
Well, there are the recent sanctions against Lukoil and Rosneft, although query how strictly they're being enforced. Is China complying with them? We don't know. And as part of the original 20-point Trump peace plan, Russia was to be readmitted to the G7, once again making it the G8. Now, European leaders have said in the past few days the only country in the G7 that wants Russia in is the U.S. under Trump. So, if you're not going to be sanctioning a country like Russia and also bringing them back into the G7, it would imply, at least I think in Trump's mind, it implies all the anti-Russia sanctions go away if that happens.
There's been a lot of commentary around having Steve Witkoff and having Jared Kushner in charge of negotiating these big deals. Of course, we saw Gaza. It was considered a major success in the moment. But the Russia-Ukraine war, according to Trump, has been a lot harder to negotiate the end of. So, I mean, if you were still in your role as National Security Advisor, Ambassador, what would you be advising Trump right now on ending this war?
Well, I suspect at this point I'd be writing another resignation letter because I don't think he'd be listening to me anymore. But I think there is simply no way you can even pause this conflict and not have in mind the situation 5 years or 10 years from now to avoid further Russian incursions. And I just don't think that long-range perspective has been included. I think that's what the UK and other European NATO members are worried about, but that's so far not been on Trump's radar screen. Now, as Rubio back in the United States today may be able to explain that to Trump, and so we'll know within I think a few days whether that's had any impact. But there's no point other than a personal aggrandizement to seek some kind of quick ceasefire, some quick even intermediate step toward a resolution of the war, because the issues are still too complex and have not been thought through.
Ambassador John Bolton, thank you for joining the Trump Report.
Glad to be with you.